Welcome to this edition of Gift of Light, where hints and clues and insights are given from one of America's most translated authors, Ellen G. White. Our special guest today, we're going to have a very rich conversation, is Susan Wolford. Welcome, Susan, to Gift of Light.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I didn't tell the watchers, those who are viewing this telecast, that you are a medical doctor. Tell us where you serve the country.
Oh, I'm a pediatrician and I work at the University of Michigan.
Pediatrician, and you work at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor.
That's right.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I read something the other day that the Center for Disease and Control in Atlanta, Georgia, indicated that obesity was a growing concern in America among children and teenagers, and that if the parents do not begin to look at it now, it can become a very overwhelming problem later on. What can you share with us about children and obesity?
Well, you're quite right. Obesity is a very significant problem and it affects children and adults in large proportions. So as you mentioned, the CDC keeps track of these things and they monitor the percentage of people who are obese across the country. And in a moment, we're going to look at a graph that shows maps of the country and shows how which states have high percentages of obesity. And we'll see the map will start out with colors that are light, like light blue, showing that only 5% are obese.
All right.
And over years, starting in 1985 up to the current year, we'll see that those colors darken as we see the percentage of obesity increasing and increasing. Let's look at the maps. Here we see that by the mid-90s, we notice that the colors are getting to be dark blue, showing that over 15 to 19% of the population in those states are obese. And by the time we get to 2006, we have states that are actually in dark red, where over 30% of the population there are already obese.
Well, you know, sometimes people are a little overweight. Is this really a major problem?
Well, that's a good point that you raise. The statistics I just showed you are actually for obesity. But as you mentioned, sometimes we're just a little overweight. If we include those who are overweight along with those who are obese, that includes more than 60% of Americans. And it really is a problem. For many of us, we're concerned about our weight, mainly for cosmetic reasons, and we think about wanting to fit into something different, and that's totally the wrong idea.
Right, right.
We're all beautiful and valuable people in the face of God, and the reason for being concerned about obesity or overweight is the effect it has on our health. Those of us who are affected by excess weight are at greater risk of developing heart disease, kidney problems, many types of cancer, diabetes. It really has a huge effect on our health, and in many cases will shorten our lives.
As a pediatrician, do you see this problem with children?
Oh, absolutely. In this graph that we'll look at now, we'll see that back in the 1970s, the percentage of children who were obese was only about 1 in 20, 5% of children. But by the turn of the century, 30 years later, over 17% of children are obese. Almost 1 in 5 children are suffering from this problem.
Well, this cannot be really a healthy thing.
Absolutely not. Even in childhood, we'll see that many children who are affected by excess weight will also suffer from things like diabetes. They'll develop joint problems, have worsening asthma. And I have a picture I'd like to show you of the blood vessel of an adolescent. Here we see those little streaks. Those are plaques that we normally think of in adults.
Adults, yeah.
Yes, that will lead to heart attacks and things of that nature. We can see these things forming even in adolescence.
15 years old. Well, how do we go about treating this? How do we go about educating a population to understand the importance of this?
Well, I think before we even get to the idea of how we treat it, we have to really think about what caused it.
That's
why
right,
are we
yes.
why are we
Okay.
here? So many of us will think about obesity as a balance. On the one hand, it's what we take in through nutrition and what we expend just with exercise. And we think fairly simple. It really isn't quite that simple. In fact, we have to think about it more in layers, all the different things that really come into play that affect what we eat and how much we can exercise.
Okay.
So things at a societal level, like what portion sizes are appropriate. In some cultures, very small portions are considered normal. Whereas typically here in the US, if you go to a restaurant and you don't get a huge plate, we think we've been
We're
gypped.
upset. That's
Exactly.
right. That's right.
Or we think about at a community level, are there safe areas to exercise? Can you afford the healthy foods? Are they even available there? Or at a school and organizational level, do kids actually get to engage in physical activity, or has gym been cut for other reasons? Or in workplaces, what do the vending machines have? I don't know what the vending
Wow.
machines here have, but do they have healthy options? All these things come into play.
What is at the center of the layers that are over this problem? Is there something at the core, the base of it?
Well, it all comes down, in the end, all of these things have an effect on the individual. So many of us, we feel that there are people around us who can eat absolutely anything they want and they're as thin as a rail. And others of us, we feel if we walk past the cake and just smell the aroma, we'll gain 10 extra pounds. There are individual factors, both psychological and genetic, that make a difference. And there's some interesting scientific facts that we can look at that show that there really are differences. One of these I'd like to tell you about is, we can see it in looking at a chemical called ghrelin.
Oh.
Ghrelin is something, and I think we'll show a graphic of it here.
Okay.
Ghrelin is something that's produced by the stomach. All of us produce it.
All of
And
us?
all of us produce
Everybody?
ghrelin. Everybody makes ghrelin. And it
Oh.
goes from our stomach to our brain, and it tells our brain to eat. And it's interesting to note here, this is the stomach sending a message to the brain. And I'll get back to that when I show you a quote from Ellen White. So remember this.
Okay.
That the stomach, the chemicals produced by the stomach goes to the brain, and it tells the brain to eat.
So that's why it's so often we're like, I'm ready to eat now. So
Right,
that's
you
ghrelin.
probably have a lot of ghrelin
Oh,
running
my
around in
goodness.
your system,
Oh,
telling
wow.
telling your brain that you want to eat. And if you really do have a lot of ghrelin, it's not just that you want to eat, but it wants you to eat things that you really enjoy.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
So
all
it's
right.
kind of important to train yourself to enjoy healthy things.
Healthy
But anyway,
things.
it will tell
Okay.
you to eat something you
Okay.
really enjoy. And as you eat it, the more you eat, there'll be a feedback to the stomach that tells the stomach, okay, produce less ghrelin. The ghrelin goes away, and then it makes it easier for the brain to feel, okay, we're full, we can stop. But for some people, they don't make that connection as well. And that ghrelin doesn't decrease as much, and so they don't have the same kind of help in stopping that eating episode.
So even if you eat and you feel satisfied, there is still something that may nudge you to eat a little bit more.
It's harder to feel satisfied for
So-
some people.
So if I train myself to appreciate salads, and you can eat a lot of salad, they tell you, because that's a good thing.
That would be a good thing. Now, the studies haven't gotten that far to show what will happen if you do that. But potentially the idea is that if you want to eat, but what you want to eat is something healthy, then hopefully it won't have the same dramatic effects
I see.
on one's weight and one's health.
Okay.
But as I mentioned, there's this, Ellen White makes a comment about the stomach
All right.
and the
Yeah,
brain being
let's
connected.
hear that. That's
and in this
dynamic.
quote we'll see here, it says
Okay.
the stomach is closely related to the brain. And it really is in so many ways. And here we find from science one of the ways in which it is that closely related.
Well, when I study or when I was in school, they would tell us don't eat before a major exam. And the reasoning they gave us, now maybe you can elaborate on that, is that the blood used for digestion would be drained away from the brain.
Well, that's one thought on this topic. And Ellen White certainly makes comments about the preference for studying before you eat rather than studying immediately after eating. And there really is also some scientific basis for that, looking also at ghrelin. Ghrelin, it appears in recent studies, affects the ability to retain information. So when it's high, as in right now, before we've
Okay.
had lunch, it's a good time to try and think and study
Okay.
because it helps you retain information. After you've eaten and ghrelin goes away, then there's less of it around to help. So ghrelin seems to have a lot of effects, and studying is one of them.
We ought to develop a cartoon or something saying that ghrelin is our friend and understand and use it. Well, that's interesting. That is so interesting. Is there anything else you want to tell us about this ghrelin before we go to break?
Well, I think that the important thing that this highlights is the fact that we're all individuals with individual systems, and so we can't make rules that cross carte blanche for everyone. But some of us may need to try different things to help control our weight, and we can't compare ourselves to others.
Okay.
But all of us can follow some general principles, which I hope we'll get to in our second half.
That is so interesting. You know, you have really shared with us some basic information that parents need to know as they train their children, because sometimes children develop, they want to eat. Maybe, is ghrelin in babies too?
All of us produce it. So at any age, it is produced.
So it's possible to put bad habits on a child, because people tend, if a baby cries, feed it. Baby needs a bottle. And after a while, as they grow, unless we make the transition, we can be giving them too much food that they really don't need, and they develop certain habits that we're not conscious of, and it's hard to break.
Well, you have hit upon an essential topic in the area of obesity control. One of the things when patients come to our clinic for the weight management program, where we start is by talking about what happened in the beginning of their lives, what happened while they were still in utero, what happened as an infant, because what happens in those early years really has a dramatic effect on what their weight status will be actually later on in life. So you're absolutely correct.
This is a good place for us to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to share with you so that you can get a better handle on ghrelin. If you have young children, you'll get some insights. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Gift of Light with our guest, Susan Wolford, MD. Susan, this is a bleak picture. I'm telling you, it seems as though everything you read has things that you shouldn't eat. I mean, if you try to lose a few pounds, you got to stop this bread, you've got to stop this, that, and the other. It's a bleak picture.
Well, it would appear that way, but I think there is some hope. At least I hope there is. Otherwise, my work will really be a disaster, because we really think that it is possible to change weight and to maintain a healthy weight. And if
I'll say that again. It's possible to change weight and to maintain. You know how many people have tried different programs, they've lost weight, and then a year later they put it back on?
Oh, absolutely. We really see that a lot. And I think that has to do with the way in which we try to lose the weight. I think it's important to try and do it in a way that we can sustain for our lifetimes, not to think of it as something that, oh, I'll go on this diet for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. It's actually that I would like to change my life to be healthier.
Lifestyle.
Well, exactly.
Okay.
A lifestyle change. A lifestyle change.
Boy, I tell you, what have you seen in your clinic as these young children come in? What are some of the major issues that you've seen?
Well, you see a lot of poor self-esteem. You see a lot of children who are on the road to diabetes, to heart disease, to all the things we've mentioned before. And we see a lot of them who are feeling a little bit hopeless, that this is really not, they cannot succeed in this area. So we really want to address all of those things with them. Now, it is true that it's a difficult situation, and it is true that diet has to be altered. And if we look at this quote from Ellen White, we'll see that she said, food should be chosen that best supply the elements needed for building up the body. In this choice, appetite is not a safe guide. We cannot safely be guided by the customs of society. The diseases and suffering that everywhere prevail are largely due to popular errors in regard to diet. So what she said there, but over 100 years ago, really relates to what we're seeing now. But so that now we know where it comes from. We know that we can't rely upon our appetites as we've trained them currently. Otherwise, we'll go astray. We know that we can't really rely upon what society tells us. If we did, we'd eat a lot of fast foods, convenience foods. We'd sort of lie around and watch TV most of the time. I mean, that typically is how most of us spend our time. and that will be very, very detrimental to our health. So we have it laid out there, the causes, and what we have to think about is how we can actually change those so that we can experience the health and the healthy weight that we'd like to achieve.
Now let's look at infants, because they're so innocent. They rely on the big people, the adults, to feed them. And yet, I think sometimes we put bad habits on them.
Oh, you're so right.
We don't intend to, we don't mean to, but it's almost like if you're around parents or people with children and they're acting up, first thing you do, give them a bottle. Like there's some magic in the bottle.
Oh, you're completely right. It really starts very early on. So when I speak to parents, before babies are born, we need to let them know that what they do while the baby is in utero actually will affect their preferences later in life. So studies have shown that based on the foods that a mother eats while she's pregnant, that will affect the foods the child likes when they're 2 or 3 years old.
Now, you made a statement, and I'm sure that most women would understand it, utero. What, if there's a man looking at this program or watching it, what is utero?
Well, while the baby is still in the uterus, while the mother is pregnant, while she's carrying that baby.
Oh, okay.
If she's having cravings for hamburgers and French fries and certain types of foods, the kinds of things that she eats will affect the child's preferences later on. It tends to be more the kinds of foods.
Okay.
So we know that children who are exposed to lots of variety and lots of vegetables while their mother is pregnant, they, when they're 2 or 3 years old, are more likely to have a preference for vegetables at that point.
All right, so if the mother's eating a lot of salads and vegetables, the child will have a proclivity toward salads and vegetables.
Absolutely. Not only does it help to nurture the baby while they're being carried, but it also has an influence on things they like later on.
Okay.
But that influence doesn't just stop while she's carrying the baby.
Okay.
When she then breastfeeds,
all right,
and hopefully she will breastfeed because the type of food she eats while she breastfeeds will also affect the child's preferences later on. So once again, mothers who eat a lot of vegetables while they're breastfeeding, their children are more likely to have a preference for those later in life.
Now, this is so basic. How do we get this information out? I mean, we changed America's concept of smoking, but it took us many years. What are some of the things we can do to get this information out to parents? And this is important. I know you have some other things to share, but I'm just curious about that.
No, this is very important information. It's not necessarily new information. I mean, Ellen White, in the Ministry of Healing many, many years ago, wrote about the importance of breastfeeding and the fact that the food that nature provides is the best food for an infant. So it's information that's been around. Now, the scientific studies are sort of more recently unearthed, but it's out there. Now, really, what we have to do is for pediatricians and physicians to be sure to let people know this. And word of mouth. It just people need to realize.
Do you share this with congregations and civic organizations? Do you share that at all?
Well, at our church in Ypsilanti, we actually have health.
Ypsilanti,
Michigan.
Michigan. Okay, all right.
We actually have health presentations every Sabbath. Every Saturday, we have a 5-minute blurb on health, which can cover a number of topics. One of the things we talk about is the importance of breastfeeding.
Wow, that's great. That's great. Okay. So what else is happening in your world with this obesity and maybe solutions that can be used?
Well, one of the important things is, if you don't like something, you probably won't eat it. So if we put you on a diet and we say to you, oh, you have to eat celery and I'm not sure what else you don't like for a period of time, the probability is you'll fall off of that diet pretty quickly. So our thoughts in weight management is to try to help change one's preferences. So not that we're having you do something you don't like forever, but that by exposing children to things that are healthy, they will actually gain a preference for it. So we know that if you feed children something 12 or 20 times, repeatedly exposing them to it, they should ultimately develop a preference for it. Now, there's some things that the kid just doesn't like. I mean, if your child doesn't like asparagus.
Asparagus, yes.
We haven't got to force them to eat that. But if there are other things that they absolutely don't despise, but they're willing to try it, just offer it. And the more it's offered, the more it's sort of hidden in the food, as they don't necessarily make an issue of them eating it, but it's there. Over time, as they ingest it, they'll grow to like it more and more.
Okay. So one solution has to do with the diet and in preparation to feed the children. What else do we do to balance out that equation?
Well, it's important to also look at the other side. So we need to look at the exercise.
Okay.
For most of us in the U.S., we really don't get as much exercise as we ought
Really?
to.
With all the sports that are going on and the beaches and
Right.
soccer and...
It's all there, but it's also competing with all of the video games and all the
Oh,
televisions, and all the
okay.
time spent
All
on the
right,
computer and on the
okay,
internet.
okay.
So for children, those things are a real draw. And we really need them to engage in about 60 minutes of physical activity a day. And for adults, about 30 minutes of physical activity a day. So that takes some planning to work it into the day,
Really?
especially if they're not getting gym classes at school.
Okay. Do you exercise?
I do.
You do?
I do.
Where in the world? Now, you know, in trying to prepare for this presentation, your schedule was heavy. I mean, you're in the clinic early in the morning into the evening. I mean, how does one get the time with a busy schedule? You're an MD, somebody else may be a student, someone else may be a mother at home.
Well, sometimes it's pretty hard to work it in. And I want to show a quote from Ellen White that will show us one way that we can work it in. She states that walking is preferable to riding or driving, for it brings more of the muscles into exercise. Such exercise would in many cases be better for the health than medicine. So walking, I think, is one of the main ways that many of us can get exercise. If we park our car further away from the grocery store rather than trying to wait for the absolute closest space, that gives us some exercise. If we, instead of taking the elevator, we actually walk the stairs to our office, that's another way to get in exercise.
Okay.
After eating, it's a good time to try and take a brief walk if it's possible. Sometimes it's hard to find an hour block or a 30-minute block, and you don't have to. You just have to find increments over the day where you can work activity into the day.
Well, now let me challenge you on this one. You know, it's so difficult to walk if you're in the city. You have these dogs that run wild. You have all kinds of people hanging around the park, and I mean, it's nervous. I was traveling once. I was in a Caribbean country, and I went out jogging.
That's good.
And I passed a home, and suddenly there were about 3 or 4 dogs, large dogs. Needless to say, that ended my jogging trail because I would not leave the home where I was. I'd try to run in place, but that was boring. You have any insights on that?
Well, sometimes it's very hard to find an opportunity to exercise. And when you're outside of your home environment, that might be difficult. But it could be possible to maybe find a shopping center. Those are usually fairly safe areas.
Okay.
Walking in a mall is often a good place to go and exercise. And then, of course, sometimes if you can just do something at home. So many of us will have DVDs that one can work out to, and they can be different ones, so that it keeps it a little more interesting and there's variety. So that you're not doing the same thing every day.
So if you were going to summarize what we've talked about in this brief conversation, because this is so exciting, what would you say?
Well, I'd say that really many of us are affected by obesity. It really is a significant problem, and many people may feel that it's hopeless. But I don't think it is. One of the quotes from Ellen White that I find most helpful to me in life is the quote that states that man's extremities are God's opportunities. If this is something that you've been struggling with, either for oneself or with a child, don't give up. This is the time to really sort of lean upon God's power and His guidance, because we have some guidance about things that can help, and there really can be success in this area.
So families can work on this, mothers with the children, fathers with their spouses, and churches and civic organizations and schools can make it a very interesting thing. Susan, thank you so much, Dr. Wolford, for being with us today and sharing this wonderful information on how to deal with this major problem. Ellen White books are available at the website AdventistBookCenter.com. Thank you very much for watching this edition of Gift of Light. We hope that the information and the insights, hints, and clues will make you a happier, healthier person right now. Until the next time, Stay in the light, watch the light, keep the light.
This program was brought to you by the Hope Channel Network, thanks to the generous support of viewers like you. In the United States and Canada, call 1-888-4-HOPE-TV. That's 888-446-7388.